Hello and welcome back to Electrified Marina Podcast. I'm your host and producer, Lawson.
And Erick Pinzon from Electrified Marina.
This show is brought to you by us at Electrified Marina and electrifiedmarina.com. Please check out our website and call us or email us if you decide you have any interest in buying a new boat or repowering an old one. Please post your questions and comments in the comment section on YouTube, and we'll do our best to get up to those and answering any kind of questions or comments that you have. So Erick, this week, let's start about kind of a recap of your auto show, Hampton Roads International Auto Show. Is that correct?
Yeah, man. I run the local electric car club here, and we bring out a pretty vast array of electric mobility, from a Harley Livewire on two wheels to scooters to cars to boats. And really, it's just public education engagement. In today's world on the internet, most people don't have a good source of truth to get information from. And so when we do these events, we have a lot of volunteers that come out, and it's all electric car owners. And some of these owners, there was a guy there on Saturday. He's had 5 EVs, been driving electric for 10 years. And we just, we are brutally honest with pros and cons, and you hear it from the horse's mouth. It's not a biased opinion. We talk about the downsides of them, but there's obviously a reason everyone's still driving electric. And so we're there just to kind of spread the word about them, good and bad.
And how many people would you say you talked to?
Our total count was a little under 800. We kept track of it in terms of engagement the entire time. So it was pretty big.
Wow. That's crazy.
It was huge, man. It was one of our biggest auto shows.
How many days
awesome.
was that?
3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And it kind of worked out because we were supposed to get some snow, and we didn't end up getting much snow. So it was super cold outside. Everything else canceled, and we had one of the only indoor events in the area. So we had a ton of foot traffic.
Awesome. Well, that's exciting. So today I want to talk a little bit more about electric boat and electric vehicle myths. So we're going to start off with the big one, the elephant in the room, right? Is that electric boats don't have enough range.
I wouldn't even call that a myth. They don't have enough range for some uses, but they also have enough range for a lot of uses. When there was one of the biggest reports done, it was a year ago on pleasure boating. And it was around 40% of pleasure boaters go less than 20 miles in a day. And I couldn't believe it, just because the gas tanks on most of these boats are massive. And, everyone complains about marina fuel, but a lot of these people stay in their local areas. And I mean, we've even went as far as pulling telematics from a couple different boat clubs between Carefree and Freedom. And, depending on the locality, some of them, there's one in Southern California, their average use was 9 miles a day. And that is minimal. You could do that with a very small battery. And, it ends up being people will go out of the marina and usually hit a restaurant or two or a sandbar or a cove, or they're anchored out at a beach, and they're just parked there most of the day. It's the social aspect of it. Obviously, if it's a deep sea fishing boat or, someone that wants to go wakeboarding all day long, sure, there are those use cases, but we relate a lot to the automotive world. Everyone thinks they need 600-700 miles of range, and they think they're going to go cross country every weekend or tow, a horse trailer uphill both ways in the middle of winter. And in reality, that's not the average use case. And so we don't even try and tackle the markets or the people that are doing, hundreds of miles a day, deep sea fishing out, 5 hours out to the canyon or something. That's not even the market we're trying to capture. We're capturing those day boaters, those pleasure boaters that stay in a small localized area. And right now, the battery capacity is sufficient to fill those needs.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So the next one is electric vehicles are, you've probably seen the cartoons on Facebook where somebody has a Tesla and they're plugged into the coal factory that's billowing smoke and patting themselves in the back, right? So the next myth is that electric vehicles are worse for the environment than combustion engines due to coal energy generation.
Yeah, the problem is most people don't realize thermal efficiency or energy efficiency or how our grid is even supplied. Obviously, if you're in the middle of West Virginia, you might get 100% coal. But nationally, the U.S. grid is 19% coal powered, and it's going down every year. Coal production is expensive. The coal ash is a huge problem. The waste to disposal side of it is a big issue. But the grid is getting cleaner every year, whether it's with renewables or nuclear, or even, let's take a step back. Even if a boat or an electric car is 100% powered by the grid, or 100% powered by coal or natural gas. Because of how inefficient a gas engine is, the electric motor is still better in terms of energy consumption. Because an electric motor is so efficient. They're 90% efficient or more. Some of them have just crazy efficiency numbers compared to a gas engine that's 20, 30% efficient. There's a reason you have a huge radiator and a huge cooling system. So much of it is wasted towards heat and parasitic losses in your driveline. Most people don't even see that side of things, but you could power a boat or a car 100% by coal and it would still be cleaner. And it's kind of crazy because everyone's used to the gasoline that comes out of the spout. It's ready to go. It's super potent, crazy energy dense. In terms of energy density, batteries compared to gasoline are 1/7 to 1/8 as energy dense. It's not a lot. They have so far to go. But people don't see the amount of electricity that goes into gasoline in terms of the production side of things. It's like 4.5 to 5 kilowatt hours to produce a gallon of gasoline. That can propel the average car 20 to 30 miles, depending on the size of the car and how efficient it is. But people don't see that side of things. So it's kind of crazy. People talk about the grid, but the more gas cars we remove off the grid, the less energy we are consuming in terms of gasoline consumption. And we already hit peak oil consumption, but nobody sees that side of things. All they see is, plugging into the grid and you're moving the emissions somewhere else. But in reality, that's true. But even a natural gas plant or even a peaker plant is a hell of a lot more efficient running at a maintained RPM at peak efficiency compared to a gasoline engine that is running poorly 100% of the time it's operating. But most people don't know the math, they don't know the physics, they don't know any of the science behind it. They just, and a lot of that comes from the greenwashing side of things. Obviously, nothing is zero emissions. And that's a buzzword in my company. We're not even allowed to say. It's not allowed to get posted anywhere. Zero emissions is you might as well say it's powered by unicorn farts. It doesn't make sense. And if there wasn't so much greenwashing, I feel like we'd make a hell of a lot more progress with all of this. There'd be a lot less people fighting against it. And so we're brutally honest with the facts of where the energy comes from, and you can tell by, there's websites where you can see where your energy grid mix is coming from, or you could have solar panels on your roof and you cut out the grid, Obviously, you're going to back feed the grid and everything, but there's a lot of people that are net producers of electricity, and the grid's coming off the energy supply is coming off their roof. So the grid's getting cleaner every year. But I would much rather, there's so many layers to this because you could plug into the grid and it's like supporting national security, whether it's coal, natural gas, whatever it is. Most people don't realize the oil we have here that we're drilling for doesn't turn into gasoline. There's a difference between sweet and crude and the type of refineries required for each one. We are a net exporter of oil, but we still have to import foreign oil for all of our gas consumption. People don't understand that side of things, whether it's coming from Canada, the Middle East, or from South America. We have to import foreign oil just because of the way we're set up in terms of refineries and the type of oil we have on hand. So I'd much rather put a coal miner or a natural gas plant to work rather than throwing my money overseas. I don't know, people are just uneducated, and most people aren't willing to open their mind or just to Google and figure that side of things out.
Yeah, the way I usually explain it is that there's only one way to get gasoline and diesel, but there's infinite ways to get electricity, right? So if you have a solar marina, that's going to be 100% clean energy. But, if you're making energy from coal, obviously not so much.
Right. And then, there's nuclear out there that's got a much, in terms of energy production per square mile, is super low, and the waste produced from it, at the end of 20, 30 years is super low. There's some counties and cities that are on hydro. They get all of their electricity from a nearby waterfall or a dam, and that's where all of their electricity is generated. So every grid has its own mix, and you can see where those sources come from. But regardless of what it is, it's going to have a lower carbon footprint and be more energy efficient than any gas-powered vehicle. You just can't. No gas-powered vehicle is that efficient. It's just the facts of it. But most people don't understand the in-depth details of it or care to. That's the problem with people.
Yeah, here in Texas, we're largely powered by wind. And if you've ever driven through Texas and you've seen the endless windmills in the Texas Panhandle, it's obviously not all wind, but a lot of it is.
Yeah,
and there's also special programs where you can opt into using wind energy.
That's what I was going to mention. They have an excess amount of wind energy at night. And in terms of grid balancing, they don't even have to give an incentive. They just have to educate EV owners to charge in the middle of the night, and we won't have a grid problem. We don't have a grid problem. Obviously when it's poorly maintained and they fall back on winterization, like obviously they'll have self-inflicted issues there. But in terms of the grid, people don't realize how minimal energy consumption there is. I mean, there's more of a problem with AI and data centers than there is with electric cars, and nobody's really upset about that. It doesn't fit their bias.
Right. It's tribalism.
That you nailed it, man. That's exactly it. And it's funny because these guys will lean on hydrogen so much, and they just want electric cars to be bad, or they don't want it to work for whatever reason, whatever that hatred stems from. They would push some green algae biofuels that aren't even around yet, as opposed to electric vehicles.
You're getting ahead of me now because, I've seen, I think Yamaha, just demoed a boat that had a hydrogen powertrain. So what are your thoughts on hydrogen and as it compares to electric boats?
It's funny, man. I was just telling somebody this story, but if you remember, there was that hydrogen program that BMW had at Oxnard, literally 20 years ago. And I tried getting a job there, but they were shutting down the hydrogen program because it didn't make sense. And it's funny because most people don't realize how hydrogen works, and it's an electric car that's more complicated. Like you've got a fuel cell that's powering an electric motor, or powering a battery that powers an electric motor. And I tell people it's an electric car that keeps big oil involved, and it keeps you addicted to big oil, because that's what it is. We don't have a sustainable method for hydrogen extraction right now. Most of it comes from methane. And then when you follow that math of how energy efficient it is, it absolutely does not make sense. And people don't realize you have to compress it to 20,000 PSI and put this tank under your car. There's been a couple of videos of these tanks that have leaked or exploded. I mean, there was one station that went up. Like, it's, they say electricity is scary and 400 volts is scary. 20,000 PSI is a lot scarier to me. But the infrastructure that's required, the extraction process that we don't have yet, literally, electricity is here, it's plentiful, it's everywhere. And it's relatively cheap in most areas. It's funny because in the boat space, there's 0 hydrogen filling stations in the world at marinas. And I was just at Monaco this past summer, and this past fall, and they had a yacht there that was powered by hydrogen. Super cool. This guy that owned it, obviously uber rich, but he paid a ridiculous amount of money to make it have an option to be powered by hydrogen. The problem is there is no filling stations in the world that can do it. And he was obviously doing it to future-proof, hopefully it becomes viable one day, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. Who knows? It might be an option. But in order to refill that yacht currently with hydrogen, they have to shut down the marina, bring a truck in. It's considered a hazmat scene because of how dangerous it is. They clear out the entire site for like 150 feet. And then they refill this boat. And it took weeks to get permits. Like it's an absolute joke. But right now it's a non-starter until we have some kind of huge breakthrough. And there's a lot of companies pursuing a lot of R&D, using a ton of money on it right now. But a lot of that's backed by big oil because they want to stay relevant. Because with EVs, you have the option to cut out big oil, whether it's solar on your roof or powering, by the grid. They lose a lot of money, and they have a lot of money. They have some deep pockets, and they're really good at lobbying. They're better than anybody else, that's for sure, between them and big pharma. But it's a non-starter right now, And a lot of companies are realizing that. They shut down on most of the stations in California. It just wasn't viable. It doesn't make sense right now. I'm hoping it does. That'd be great if it changed one day, but in the immediate future, until there's a breakthrough, it doesn't make sense. When in reality, electric cars make sense right now. That we don't need a breakthrough for these to be viable, and you can tell because they're selling millions of them.
Yep. All right. The next one is EVs are worse for the environment due to the giant lithium mines.
There's a lot there. I tell people electric propulsion isn't perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. There is obviously a huge front-loaded carbon footprint from any battery, big or small, and it takes some time for that break even in terms of a carbon footprint. There's quite a few different studies, like really in-depth white papers that have been done in the automotive world that say average driver on the average national grid is 3 to 4 years. and that can get stretched to, as quick as 2 years if you're powered by solar on your roof, or 5 to 6 years if you're powered by coal and pure natural gas. But in the reality of it is, lithium extraction isn't near as bad as oil extraction or cobalt, and the other side of it is, we've been mining for minerals for decades. Nobody has cared. There's been lithium in phones and in laptops and so much that we use, and nobody has cared. But all of a sudden it's bad because electric cars and electric boats need it. But lithium extraction isn't, huge open pit mining that you always see on the internet. A lot of it that's in South America, they drill down, they bore down, and then they extract it in a brine. And it's like, think of it like a liquidy, sandy material. They pump it into these huge fields that are like football sizes big, use the sun to dehydrate it, and then they scrape it up with an excavator. And all those pictures you see of like kids mining in the Congo and everything, that's cobalt. And cobalt is getting phased out. It has been for the last few years, but most people aren't educated enough to realize that. Cobalt is in NMC, nickel manganese cobalt batteries, but most of the automotive world and almost all of the boat world is using lithium iron phosphate, LFP, LiFePO, but they don't use cobalt anymore in most batteries, a majority of the automotive world already. But lithium extraction isn't near as bad as people think it is. But again, we've been mining for tons of different metals all over the world for decades in huge open pit mines, but people haven't cared until it became a hot button topic. It's pretty irritating, actually. Everyone wants to get on a soapbox and act like they're an environmentalist all of a sudden, when really they have never cared. And oil extraction isn't exactly the cleanest or safest. We've had a couple of spills of millions of gallons. I mean, there was just 2 huge ships that just sunk I think they were like Russian oil tankers or something. It's kind of crazy when you look at it. It's like 40% of worldwide shipping is for oil. And obviously, we're never going to get away from it. We're going to need it for production of so much. But if we're not consuming it every single second a gas engine is turned on, our consumption rates go down a lot more. It's a different of one-time consumption for a plastic or, medicine or lubricants or whatever it is, that kind of consumption that's one time, and it's not just a continuous consumption, weekly or daily consumption. It moves the needle drastically in terms of how much we actually need to extract. But people act like lithium mining is a huge problem, but like, we're extracting oil in the ocean, and there's spills more often than there should be. But nobody seems to get as upset about that.
All right. The next one is electric batteries are only good for a few years and then need to be thrown away.
And, they've gotten this stigma from cell phones and laptops and these like dumb batteries, quote unquote. And, hybrids didn't do much better with nickel metal hydride stuff. But even then, Priuses were lasting 150, 200,000 miles on original batteries. Honda Insights, they were doing pretty good. And they're finding that electric car batteries they have a smart BMS, a battery management system that manages the temperature, the voltages, charging curves, every bit of it to prolong the battery life. And obviously the manufacturers, push the limits for convenience sake, but they still have to warranty these things. Every battery on the automotive market has an 8-year, 100,000 mile warranty at a minimum. Some of them are even higher than that. The boating world, 3 to 5 year warranties or so. We don't have much data from the boating world, just because boats, bigger lithium-powered boats haven't been out there long enough. But the automotive world, they're finding that they are lasting way longer than expected. I've personally owned 2 Teslas with over 200,000 miles on original batteries. It's pretty interesting. There's a Facebook group called the Tesla High Mileage Club or something. There's people in there reporting daily with 3 and 4 and 500,000 miles on original battery packs. And obviously at some point they are going to need to be replaced. But there's times when they have a component failure inside and it's not a battery cell or module that needs replaced. There's times that just a temp sensor goes bad or a fuse or a contactor. So batteries can last a hell of a long time. The one of the most common batteries in the boating world is the Chrysler 63 kilowatt hour battery. And it's rated for like 3,000 cycles. So if the average boat owner, takes their boat out, call it 100 times a year, which is a super high. That's like rental company usage. It's going to last 30 years. In reality, the average boat owner is going out 20, 30 times. So it's not even a factor in terms of ownership costs, maybe 3 to 5 owners down the road, 20, 30 years from now. But it's this huge myth that people are paranoid about. And the other side of it is, man, I mean, we both worked at BMW. We saw the cost of engines and transmissions. I mean, I remember doing a $40,000 M5 engine, but that was like, oh yeah, needed an engine. And that was just expected. I was doing $15,000 transmission. They're like, oh, yep, they got 90,000 miles out of it. Like, it was like a good thing. They were like proud of it. But people don't bat an eye at that stuff. They've got Toyota Tundra engines blowing up left and right. They're $30,000. My neighbor needs one. But like that stuff isn't, that's not on the headline news as much when that kind of stuff happens. It's very much people just get, I don't know, the haters fuel a lot of this stuff, and that's what sells. So the media is there, the clickbait is there, and everyone thinks these things are dropping like flies. Do you think people would be buying a second and a third EV if they were doing batteries every couple of years? It just doesn't make sense. I can't stand the amount of misinformation out there. And that's why I've kind of been so motivated over the last few years to help try and clear things up. And I can't tell you how many times how many events we've volunteered at just to help spread information out there. And we like to share the good, bad, and the ugly of it. Yes, the range sucks when it's freezing cold and you're going in the mountains or you're towing. Like, yeah, there are drawbacks to it. There's pros and cons to everything. But as long as you're using the right tool for the right job and with the tiniest bit of planning, it could fit into most people's lifestyle. But I think that's one of the biggest controversial parts of it is everyone thinks it's getting forced and jammed down their throat. And in reality, right now, it's not getting forced on anybody. Like California has mandates 10 years from now, 2035, whatever. But these people feel oppressed right now. And it's internally, emotionally, they're feeling oppressed. Like the second there is a ban in place or mandates in place that's forcing us right now, I will be on the other side fighting against that because the free market should be deciding this. It shouldn't be people forcing things. And obviously, there is something to be said for mandates that are needed, whether it's some of the stuff the EPA has done to clean up certain rivers or what have you. So there is a time and place for mandates. But if the market decides on its own, your adoption rate would be so much higher if you weren't forcing it on people. And people feel like it's forced on them right now, but it's not. And that's part of the big problem. I think our take rate and our adoption rate and the resistance just wouldn't be there if a mandate wasn't announced that's 10 years from now. Got on a tangent there. Just get heated about this stuff, man. The amount of misinformation it gets so irritating.
I am aware. So the next one, I'm going to say counterpoint, not really a myth, is that electric boats need to be driven several tens of thousands of hours to offset the high upfront cost.
I try to have a counterpoint to that right now. These things aren't cheap. They are expensive. Like, we are not hiding that. We are in the early adopter stages, when, Tesla's delivering, I don't know, I think there's like 500,000 cars last year. I forget what the number was. Maybe it was for the quarter. I don't know. Obscene amount of cars, hundreds of thousands. In terms of electric boats, there's probably less than 100 high-speed electric boats in all of the United States. Like, you could equate that to EVs circa 2008, when all you had was like a Nissan Leaf, a Chevy Volt, and a Roadster. So economies of scale aren't anywhere close to where they need to be to make these affordable. These manufacturers are ramping up right now. It's very much in the innovator stages, not even early adopter. And that's before the early minority. So we have a long way to go before these things become affordable. But that's what happens with all new technology, whether it's a TV, a cell phone, electric cars, we saw that. And now you can get used Teslas for $20,000. I mean, I was just at the auto show. They have some awesome electric cars for $40,000 now, $45,000. And obviously that still sounds expensive, but that's the average price of a new car these days. Kind of sucks, but that's the nature of the beast right now. But yeah, they are expensive and not everybody can afford them. And we're not denying that. But we have to sell them to those, the top tier of income brackets to get it more affordable for everybody else. And that's what we're targeting right now.
Okay, the next myth is that the power grid can't handle everyone having EVs.
And again, people are just uneducated, just purely ignorant about this stuff. They have 4 electric vehicles plugged into my house right now. I have a boat charging at 32 amps, my truck charging at 32 amps. We have a Jeep hybrid charging at 15 amps, and then a Ford C-Max hybrid pulling another like 3 kilowatts. And like all of that combined is probably what my house would pull during peak time. And I'm crazy. I have 4, electric vehicles out there. But for the average household to get one electric vehicle on a 30 or a 50 amp circuit, call it a 40 amp circuit, it'd be the equivalent of everybody adding a stove or a water heater that runs all the time. It is not a ton of power. And I think that's what the misconception. Obviously, if everyone had a DC fast charger in their house, that's different. Nobody can do that because they don't even have enough electricity at their house. And the DC fast chargers can put a big impact on the grid. But 98% of charging happens at home. I use DC fast chargers, and the average person uses them when they're road tripping. That is not every day. That's not every weekend. That is a handful of times a year. I've met some owners that have gone a year or two and had never used a fast charger before, and they were excited about that Christmas road trip they were taking. But the grid right now could handle an EV in every household, because they can charge overnight, and it's super off-peak is what it's called, and every grid has a demand curve, depending on the time of day, the season, whether it's everyone waking up and turning on their heaters and their stove and coffee pot and, all of these loads at the same time, or in the afternoon when everyone gets home and starts cooking and, HVAC and everything else. But there's peaks, and the utility has them dialed in. They have peaker plants specifically to handle those peak load times. But if you were to just shift those cars to plug in overnight, by the way, every electric vehicle out there has a scheduled charger on it. You could tell it to finish charging at 5 or 6 a.m. And that's when that grid is hardly getting used. So that is a myth that most people are oblivious about. And they always refer to the California brownouts or the issues that Texas had in the middle of winter in, 1 in 100-year freezing temps. California has issues or brownouts in the middle of the afternoons when everybody's getting home and everyone's kicking on their air conditioning and these huge heat waves. That's not when people are plugging in their cars. EVs are not part of that problem. That might be a problem on mismanagement and lack of maintenance on a grid, sure, but EVs are not causing that problem. And if you looked at the energy consumption of these data centers, there's a reason Amazon and Google and all of these guys are literally opening their own nuclear plants because of how much power they're requiring. So they have to provide their own power sources for how much consumption they're going to be taking, especially going forward as AI gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I usually have a couple of counterpoints to this one. The first one is that people are probably charging way faster than they need to be. Like, it's not an inherent electric vehicle problem. It's that people are charging, 7 and 9 and 10 kilowatts. And me, personally, I charge mine like 1 kilowatt, and it works just fine, and I drive enough.
And it's funny you bring that up, man. Average driver is like 37 miles a day or something. You could charge at 3 kilowatts all night long and be perfectly fine. It'd be better on your battery. It would be more energy efficient. You'd have to have less cooling in the vehicle to keep the battery cool and the inverter or the rectifier cool. But most EV owners don't realize that at all. And, I see these guys putting in 48 and 80 amp chargers for some of these trucks. And I always ask them, like, oh man, do you have a huge commute? Yeah, I drive about 40 miles a day. It's like, okay, you're going to be done charging in 2 hours, And don't get me wrong, there's those people that drive 150, 200 miles a day that might need high amperage charging. That is not the average person. Average person's driving 40 miles a day. You could get by on a 110 outlet. Average car can get 3 to 5 miles on a regular 15 amp, 110 volt outlet. And you can charge that in 12 hours. It's very common for a car to be parked from 8 o'clock at night till 8 in the morning. That is very average. It's not pushing the boundaries by any means. So a lot of people I've met haven't even installed a charging station. And then you add that in with the amount of people that work from home. Like, a lot of people don't even need charging stations. It's kind of crazy to think about. And that topic actually came up quite a few times over at the auto show. We're chatting with these people that are interested in electric, or they have a plug-in hybrid with a super tiny battery. Some of these plug-in hybrids, they have a 12 or 15 kilowatt hour battery. Even on a 32 amp charging circuit, charging at 6 or 7 kilowatts, you can't charge more than 2 or 3 hours. Your battery will be full. But it's easy and less complicated to tell them just to install a 40 amp circuit, put a 32 amp charger in there, and future-proof yourself. There's something to be said for that. But dialing down the charging is what most EV owners aren't educated enough, and it gets pretty complicated. There's a lot of jargon. There's a lot of different terminology that you get introduced to buying electric. It's like I tell people, it's like imagine getting that first smartphone. It takes some time to learn, and so the less barriers to entry we have with terminology and jargon being one of them, the more mainstream we can make this stuff, the easier it is. So yeah, it's a misconception that a lot of EV owners have as well, thinking they need the absolute fastest charger possible when they drive 30, 40 miles a day.
And my second counterpoint was going to be about a technology that not many vehicles have right now. I think the Ford Lightning is probably one of the only ones that has vehicle to grid. But that has the potential to completely solve that problem by simply like offloading that load to a different time of day, which it can actually make the grid cleaner as well as more resilient.
And that's really what's going to get exciting here in the next couple of years. And I'm super irritated that nothing has been standardized up until this point. I remember, I think it was Kia or Hyundai, they did a case study and did like a whole community on it. And it was a small community. I think it was like 20 or 30 houses or something. But they did a case study to show how efficient it could be done. And if they were to just standardize it, have every car have the hardware in there, because it's nothing but, it's a very simple set of hardware that's only a few $100s and some software to manage that. But if they were to have integrated that or standardized that like they finally did the NACS charging plug, we could be so much further along. And, you bring that up and it's super interesting. We're redesigning a marina right now, and we're going to have that capability on a couple of our docks. We're going to have smart load balancing electrical panels, and then the chargers are all going to be connected. We're essentially going to have our own microgrid. And when you think about it, in terms of boat usage, most of these boats are going to sit all week long and they get used on the weekend. So during the week, they can get utilized to balance the grid all day long. It's going to be pretty cool. It's going to cost a ton of money, and it's not going to make much money. But the proof of concept to show what can be done is what we're going after, because most of these people haven't pursued this stuff just because nobody else has done it. And it takes someone that isn't this absolute, pure capitalist to chase it down just to show that it can be done. And we're going to do it. So it's kind of exciting.
All right. The next myth is that electric vehicles are more likely to catch fire.
That's like one of the oldest ones in the book, man. And like it doesn't matter how many statistics you put in front of somebody, they just don't believe it. It's like 59.5 times more likely per capita for a gas vehicle to catch on fire. And that factors in how many cars are out there and, how few EVs are out there. Because in reality, 1 to 2% of our road-going vehicles are electric right now. It might be 9 or 10% of new car sales, but the amount of EVs on the road is still very small. But gas cars catch fire all the time, and they don't make the news because it's so common. I see it all the time when I'm driving out on the interstate, and you see a huge burn spot. And every time I drive by, it's like, oh, I didn't see that on the news because it wasn't an EV. And yes, they are harder to put out. There's a company, the name is getting by me right now, but it is a company that, in order to put out EV fires, the problem is most firemen, 1, lack of training, but 2, they just hose down the top of the car. And that's not, in the event of an accident and the battery is compromised and you're having thermal runaway inside a battery pack, you need to get temperatures down inside the pack. That is hard to do with water from the top of the car. The one method is I see it a lot more in Europe. It will literally bring over like a container, like a dumpster, fill it with water, and just drop the car in. And that's one of the safest and quickest ways to deal with it. Obviously, if that's not readily available, the other technology, I think it was called Best, but it was they literally throw this thing underneath a car, and it has this mechanism that punctures up through the battery pack, and that's where it cools it down. And so it'll literally flood the battery pack, whether you're doing that with water or some other kind of chemical. But
Fills
that's
it up
what's
from
going
the
to
inside.
literally, yeah. And that's what you have to do, because that's where all the heat is. And you're not going to put out a fire. It doesn't need oxygen to burn. When there's thermal runaway occurring, it gets so hot, it is creating it on its own with the event that's happening inside there. And then it can just catch the next cell on fire, and it can happen the entire time. And there's times where some fire departments, their method is to just let it burn. If it's not if it's not compromising anything around it, and it's in an open parking lot or at a non-compromising position, you can just let it burn itself out. You don't have to waste tens of thousands of gallons of water. But it's going to take time for all the fire departments to be trained. And there's the argument that a lot of these fire departments are underfunded and they can't buy the latest and greatest tech to fight these things. But they're going to have to adapt, like we do with everything else. It takes time. It's going to take money, and it's new technology it's here to stay. It's not a fad. You could have argued and said it was a fad 10, 15 years ago when there was hardly any on the road, but these things are selling, and the rate that they're selling is going higher and higher every year. And it's going to be this exponential effect because more people are telling their friends, their family, their coworkers, their neighbors, and that's how these cars are selling. People love them so much, they're buying a second one, or their sphere of influence is the ones buying it. So it's not going anywhere. So it's something that you have to adapt to. You have to tackle, and they already have solutions for it. It's a little expensive right now.
The next counterpoint is electric vehicles lead to job losses in oil and legacy auto industries.
You could say the same thing about the horse and buggy industry when cars were coming out. It's funny that people always bring that up. And yeah, I was chatting with somebody 2 weeks ago. He's a big proponent in the solar industry and gets a ton of, I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of acres installed worth of solar. And they have job retraining programs out in rural Virginia and West Virginia. And they're hiring these oil workers and coal miners that are losing jobs in those fields to retrain on solar. It's a lot cleaner. It's a lot safer. And they're getting paid good money to do it. Electricians make damn good money. And so, yeah, there might be some job shifting there, but that kind of happens with any new tech. You could say the same thing for AI. The amount of jobs AI is gonna disrupt is absolutely massive, and it already is. But yeah, there's going to be some job changes, and it's really going to be interesting what happens in the automotive world, because the amount of vehicles that a technician can support on gas versus electric is a huge difference. So these dealerships that have these huge, beautiful facilities with 100 technicians or whatever it is to support their market, they are going to need less over time. And that again, that's one of those things you just have to adapt and overcome it. We also don't have people tuning carburetors and changing points, out there. They're not, shimming valves, and so the technology changes. I don't know. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. The amount of jobs that it is going to create, and it might be a higher skilled job, and it's really cool because I'm part of a Facebook group called Tesla Professionals or something. But half those guys in there are these backwoods mechanics that took the time to educate themselves on high voltage. And it's not hard to work on. Yeah, it can be dangerous, but so can anything. But these guys are tearing apart these batteries and these motors, and they're doing it in barns and sheds. And it is the coolest thing to see. There's a guy in rural Iowa, and he's opened up a Tesla shop, and he used to work on forklifts and stuff. But now he's opening up battery packs. But these guys are all documenting stuff, and they're working together. And a lot of the manuals now from Tesla are open. But over time, it's going to create a new network of third-party shops that are doing high-voltage repairs. And obviously, we've always had them with hybrids and stuff, but the amount of the market penetration and the complexity of repairs goes up when you're dealing with 400 to 800 volts versus a 100 or 200 volt hybrid system. But a lot of these guys are taking it upon themselves to educate themselves and share the material, and they've got wiki sites set up for it. And it's the coolest thing. So it's creating new jobs at the same time. But either way, you kind of have to adapt. I was giving a presentation at a local Votech recently, and I told these guys whether you love or hate it, capitalize on it, make money on it. It doesn't matter if it's your passion. It's a job. It doesn't have to be your passion. That's what your hobbies are for. But I could tell there was a bunch of these young mechanics, for lack of a better word, that were, oh, I just want to work on my Chevys and Fords. It's okay, well, they're shifting a lot to electric too. And if you want to get paid the most, you need to be desirable. And that's having the biggest skill set you can. And if you're going to put your blinders on and not learn new technology, you're going to be less desirable. And, the same thing could be said for the last guys that were holding on to carburetors that didn't want to learn fuel injection. It's going to happen. The change is here. You need to adapt and be one of the early ones. I mean, that's kind of my blessing, if you will, or my luck that would jump into Tesla back in 2012. I took a huge pay cut from BMW jumping to it, hoping it's going to turn into something, but I saw the opportunity. I saw what they were doing, and they looked like they were going to take over, and they are. They just had their first decline in sales year over year ever, literally ever. It's the first time they've had a decline in sales, but they're eating these people's lunch. I mean, they surpassed Audi in worldwide sales. Just absurd. If you just said that to anybody 10 years ago, they would have just laughed at you. But no, it is going to lose some jobs, but it's also going to create some new ones. Adapt and overcome. And otherwise, you're just making excuses.
So the next one I'm going to call a counter argument is that electric vehicles can experience significant range reduction in cold weather.
Yeah, that is true. It's physics. It's you can't get past it. Like the same thing happens with gas vehicles, though. I was just at Snowshoe, West Virginia. It was -10 with a wind chill, and I was helping diesels and gas vehicles that wouldn't start because it was so damn cold. My Ford Lightning was doing just fine. It was plugged into a charger overnight. It stayed nice and warm. There's a couple points to this, and a lot of it stems from lack of owner education. I think the most popular, clickbait that went out there was in Chicago when they had their crazy deep freeze. I think it was 2 years ago now. But it was literally these Uber drivers that had no at-home charging and no education on the matter. And there was, charge handles that were left in the snow that got filled with ice. And, oh my God, they're stranded. Electric cars don't work in the cold. Norway is very cold, and they have a ton of electric cars. They have more than anybody in terms of the penetration rate there.
Yeah, I think it's like 90% of new sales, right?
Literally, it's just absurd, a whole nother level. And those guys are fed off of oil. They have so much oil there, but they're smart and they're selling the oil and shifting to electric. But I prefer an EV in extremely cold weather. The energy consumption of the heater, if you're stuck in traffic or stuck in a blizzard and not moving, the EV can last so much longer because it's so much more efficient. You're not running a gas engine just to generate your heat. But when it comes down to those situations, when people are stranded, I think it was either last year or the year before, Interstate 95 here, there was a huge shutdown. People were stuck literally overnight. It was like 16, 18 hours or something. I knew 2 EV owners that were stuck in that. They had a car full of gas car owners that ran out of gas. And that stuff doesn't make the headlines. This guy was obviously posting on his own social media and stuff, and I think one of them went viral. But it comes down to how much energy you started with, whether it's gasoline or a percentage of charge. But whenever we have a huge cold front coming in, I just had one here in Virginia. I knew it was going to get down to crazy freezing temps. We might lose power. I fully charged the night before. If I needed to use a space heater and heat my house, I could have done it for days powered by my truck. It is a massive battery. But the impact from the range happens a lot from, people still do 70, 80 miles an hour on the interstates. Speed is the biggest killer of range on road trips. But what a lot of people don't do, they leave with a cold battery. If EV owners educated themselves just a little bit and just scheduled a departure time. So that's when you go, whether it's through the app or the car or your charger, and tell it, hey, I want this to be fully charged at 7 a.m. when I leave for this huge road trip. And instead of your car charging for 2 hours, finishing the charge, at midnight, and then it cold soaks for the next 7 hours, and then you end up leaving with this stone cold battery. If you were to jump in it at 7 a.m. with a cold battery, instantly your battery heater's kicking on. You're trying to heat this cabin that is, below freezing temps if your car is parked outside. That's going to consume a ton of energy. You can have an impact of 20, 30%, absolutely massive. But if you were to just schedule that departure time and it heats up the cabin and it's been charging, just before your departure, now you've got a nice warm battery. There is almost no impact to leave. Obviously, there's going to be some out there because you're using the heat at a higher rate. But I drive to Snowshoe pretty frequently as a ski resort out there. And we drive 240 miles to Stanton, Virginia. I can do that. It doesn't matter if it is 10 degrees like it was last week or if it's 90 degrees. And I do it almost at the same speeds every time, unless it's snowing, obviously. But that preheated cabin and preheated battery negates most of that impact. And now there's another layer to this. If you were to drive somewhere and then park it overnight where you didn't have charging, yes, you will wake up to a cold-soaked battery and have a huge impact when you depart. But with a little bit of planning, you could find a hotel that has a charger. Even plugging into a 110 outlet would help overnight. It's not going to be enough to keep it warm if it's sub-zero temperatures, obviously, but the tiniest bit of planning and education goes a long way. But the average person isn't that smart or educating themselves. So we end up with this, oh, they're terrible in the cold. And it's like, yeah, they are when you don't know what you're doing.
Right. And you mentioned the Texas storm. I'll never forget that, man. That was like Valentine's Day 2021. And we lost power everywhere. It was freezing cold. I think it was like 14 degrees. And yeah, I think I had my Bolt at the time, the Bolt with a B. And I hooked up my inverter to that and ran a space heater, and we had at least one room in the house that was warm, and we had all our, computers and stuff and the modem and all that fun stuff. So we had the internet, and
I love it. I remember talking
huge.
to you during that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, man. It's like the energy in one of these vehicles is massive on most modern EVs. You could power at least like a window AC unit or a single space heater, and then you add a fridge and a Wi-Fi and your cell phones and laptops on a power strip. The average vehicle, if you know ahead of time that a big storm is coming and you charge up to 100% the day before, God forbid, you can power a house, quote unquote, your bare necessities for a few days. There's guys that take it to another level with, the Silverado or the Hummer EV or the Ford Lightning with these massive battery packs, and they, have a load manager and a sub panel, and they're powering their damn hot water heater, because these things can put out 30, 40 amps of power. I think the Lightning is like 9.6 kilowatts. That's 40 amps of power. It's a ton of power that you can utilize. So as long as you manage your loads right, I mean, I could power my air conditioning. So it's quite a bit. And people, you're usually not caught off guard when a huge storm is coming. It doesn't matter if it's a hurricane or a blizzard. Like, you're gonna get some kind of warning, and you can top off and charge. And the other side of that is, if you're trying to escape during a tropical storm or a blizzard or what have you, the EV chargers are usually a lot less packed than the gas lines are. I mean, there was people recently escaping Florida, and there was a couple guys that were capturing a lot of content of it, and they had friends and family waiting in these gas lines, sometimes for an hour or two, just to get up there and find out they ran out of gas. Meanwhile, these guys are charging in the same parking lot right next to them with plenty of empty chargers. And as long as the grid has electricity, you're going to be fine charging. Most gas stations don't have backup generators to keep those pumps running. Yeah, somebody can bring a backup, standalone generator, or you can hand crank it, whatever, if, zombie apocalypse happens. But most people are screwed if the power goes out. And if you know ahead of time, you can just top off your EV to 100%, and you do a heck of a lot better during a natural disaster or a big storm than somebody with a gas vehicle does. Obviously, if everybody had, home backup generators, that'd be a different story, but that's not most of America.
I specifically remember prior to that storm driving by the gas station and seeing 100 cars lined up around the block going. I'm like, oh man, that sucks. As I drive by and go home and plug in my garage.
Dude, I feel bad. We lost power. It was in the middle of summer. Somebody hit a transformer in front of our house, or in front of our neighborhood. And there were people posting on there bitching and complaining. And here I am, like, plugging extension cords into my truck. And it's like, oh, should we power 2 window AC units or just one tonight? And obviously, like, I plugged in my neighbors nearby, but like, everybody appreciated it after that. And my one neighbor that he gives me crap all the time about the EV stuff, he had a gas generator. He hadn't started it in years, and he couldn't get it started. It's like, hey man, I've got 100 foot of extension cord here. Like, I could run it through your side window if we want to make this work. He's like, okay. I was like, but you can't give me shit about electric cars ever again, because this is like saving your ass right now. And it was like 85 degrees overnight, super humid, like not fun sleeping conditions. And they were nice and dry and cooled down that night, thanks to it was my Lightning at the time. But I did it once a couple years ago with a Tesla that we had too. But people don't realize how big these batteries are, and also like how affordable they are for off-grid storage. If it is your daily driver and you're getting the consumption from that. But if you were to try and install 40, 60, or 100, 100 kilowatt hours of battery in your garage to back up for home energy storage, the cost would just be stupid. And now you've got it with a vehicle. So it's kind of a win-win there.
All right. So the next one I have is electric vehicles don't go vroom vroom.
It's funny, man. I had my Harley Livewire at the auto show, and it was probably the most commonly used phrase out of my mouth that entire weekend. And people would walk up and say, "Oh, that's not a real Harley." I'm like, "Yeah, it doesn't leak oil like one either." And like that was always my comeback. Like, yeah, if you like, don't get me wrong, you get inputs from your senses, whether it's feel, smell, taste, sound, what have you. And there's something to be said for vehicles lacking that. But most people don't have that in a daily driver. There's a reason the Prius and the Corolla and the Camry sell so well as a commuter. It's because they just get you from point A to point D, point A to point B. Those vehicles don't have soul either. Like, don't get me wrong, I'll have an exotic, or I might have like an old BMW, weekend car one day. It's definitely not going to be my daily commuter, but a lot of that goes away and you realize how much you don't miss that. I just had a buddy I saw at the auto show. He ended up coming up there. This guy was, not anti-EV, but kind of on the fence. And he got a Tesla Model Y just as a commuter because the lease deals were so good on it. And he fell in love. He is absolutely drinking the Kool-Aid. Like he's in the cult, man. It is so bad. He's looking at electric boats now. I was super excited to see. But you realize how much of that stuff you don't need anymore. There's some purists out there that say they'll never go away from it. But when I was at Tesla, I saw Porsches getting traded in, Ferraris getting traded in, all kinds of high-end vehicles, M cars, AMGs, I don't care. All of it got traded in. And these people realize they don't need that stuff. It's instant torque is fun. The silence of it is fun. It's actually enjoyable. And you go from an EV to a gas vehicle and it feels like an antique. Whether it's the transmission that's shifting and, jerking you back and forth as it tries to find the right gear for you to accelerate, or, the engine gets super loud 2-3 seconds before you even feel it move forward. But they really do feel antiquated. And I warn people all the time. I literally was talking to a guy before this, looking at a Ford Lightning. He's like, "Oh, I think I'm going to go test drive one." It's like, okay, careful. It's a trap. You don't want to drive one unless you are ready to make the jump, because your old vehicle will not feel the same. It's going to be miserable. And the same thing happened to me 13, 14 years ago. I had a 335 IS BMW, pretty nice BMW, had a tune, intake, exhaust, like it was putting down some power. And I rode in a Tesla Roadster, and I remember getting back in my car. I started it and I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I can get, this is still cool. I still enjoy this." And I went out and I was getting on the on-ramp and I punch it, just trying to get through the gears. And I was like, that felt so slow. It was just like, it just didn't do it for me anymore. And I was the biggest gearhead, man. My first car was a Fox Body Mustang. I had a Z28 Camaro. Like, I've had my share of fun, cool cars. I had old BMW motorcycles, and now everything I've got is electric. And one day when I've got the extra time, expenses, and, garage space, I might get another gas vehicle. But right now, I don't miss it at all. Whether it's the maintenance, the fueling up, going to the gas station every damn week, like none of that is enjoyable. And I hate going to dealerships, and now I can almost neglect my vehicles just short of tire rotations. You don't go to the shop often anymore. Your brakes are lasting forever. You don't have oil changes, like other than tires and eventually suspension, 150,000 miles later, they don't need a lot of repairs. So yeah, you could say they don't have much soul, but most cars don't. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, a lot of people that know me at the time will laugh because my last gasoline car was a straight pipe Cadillac CTSV.
I remember.
And that thing was loud and I would rip. But, whenever you did rip, you were bringing a lot of attention to yourself, which can be, kind of fun, but it's also, I hope there's no cops nearby, you know what I mean?
Right,
even if you're not going fast, they're gonna hear you, they're gonna see you, and you're gonna get attention. But in the electric car, you nail it, and there's like no noise at all, and you kind of just sneak through the traffic, and nobody even knows you're there.
Yeah, I tell people I don't care if you love it or hate it. Instant torque is fun. I remember going to the old Cars and Coffee events. I started doing it in like 2013, 14 or so, and I would take a car from Tesla on the weekends, a loaner, and I would go to these car shows, and the entire show I would just do ride and drives the entire time. I would pick people up and I'd get back, there'd be a line waiting, and I was the Tesla guy giving people rides. But I was out there trying to change minds. I don't care who you are, torque will put a smile on your face. We called it the Tesla grin. And like, yeah, you call it a one trick pony, but like your stoplight racing, whatever you want to call it, that 0 to 60, that's most of your day-to-day driving. I don't care what your car does in a quarter mile or 0 to 100. I'm not doing that every day. I'm not risking a reckless ticket. I mean, I do drive fast, but like I'm not doing that every single day. And like that's not where my car needs to perform. But that low end torque, that 0 to 60, that is the fun part. That is the most usable power you'll ever get. Obviously, there's going to be people that never want to convert, but I could also take that same guy, put him in a Plaid, put him in a Rivian. Hell, even my Lightning, just 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. It feels slow to me now because I've had my share of Teslas and a Rivian and my Livewire. And the truck is slow to me, and I'll punch it, and everybody always makes noise in the truck, and I have to act excited. But that feels slow to me now. I mean, it ruined me in terms of acceleration. And it's kind of funny. My daughter has only grown up with electric. I mean, since she was 2 years old, she's been in electric vehicles. And she rides with me on the back of my Harley. And that thing's 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. It is stupid fast. And she's not going to be impressed by most cars out there. We race cars, not officially, but I know someone who races cars quite often out on the road. And whether it's I'm by some Navy bases, so there's Camaros and Challengers and Chargers. Yeah, right, exactly. We play around with them, and unless it's a Hellcat or ZL1 or something like top of the line, huge tune or a big blower or turbos, my truck with 0 to 60 in 4 seconds is gonna beat them. A lot of these other gas vehicles out there, they might have an impressive 0 to 60 time, but that's also on like a perfect track with a great driver that can shift perfectly with the right conditions. And that's not most people or most scenarios. With an EV, it's almost cheating. I remember I used to do autocross racing, and I entered in the novice class because it was my first time racing, and I almost got kicked out because they thought I was cheating. They thought I had experience. And really, I had a performance Tesla Model 3 with some sticky tires on it, but the thing was so fast, and there was not as much driver skill needed. You weren't banging through gears trying to stay in the perfect power band. And it got to the point where they almost beat me up, literally, and I gave this guy my key card. I was like, dude, take this thing out, go put it through its paces, and like I need you to see what it does so you don't kick my ass. And this guy went out there and did it. And he was only a few seconds away from his GT350R, one of those with like the carbon ceramic brakes and, it had a roll cage in it. He had a race car. And my performance Model 3 was only a couple seconds behind him. And I remember him getting out of the car. He shakes my hand. And I was like, well, he's like, I don't know if I'm more pissed or impressed. He said, but that's not fair. I was like, okay, but either way, I'm still a novice. Like, you beat my time by 10 seconds. Like, it's not my skill. It's the vehicle doing it. But it's an on-off switch, But it's either way, yeah. Electric vehicles can be a lot of fun. Obviously, 0 to 60 is like the most usable part. But most people aren't doing the quarter mile every day or doing 100 to 150 or, putting it on the skid pad to see how many G-forces it can take in the turns. But most people have a good time when they feel the acceleration of an EV.
I think that's most of the myths that I had. Do you want to comment? Who do you think is behind the perpetuation of these myths and why?
Man,
all the usual suspects probably.
Huh? I used to say this about Elon, man. When you have somebody that's that disruptive to multiple billion and trillion dollar industries, when you're that disruptive, you get a lot of haters, and there's a lot of people that want you to fail. There's a ton of evidence out there of paid oil agenda to, whether it's research or marketing campaigns or what have you. But it's crazy because it creates these oil advocates out there, and these guys are so confidently wrong. And that's why I spend too much time on social media, is correcting these guys because they are so stupid. They're so wrong. And like the quickest Google search would debunk their entire statement. And I was just doing it this morning. The guy's like, oh yeah, once these batteries are piling up in landfills. It's like, dude, these things are getting recycled. They're worth so much money. Like, that has been solved for a couple of years now. And he's still shouting it from the rooftops. He had like 35 likes on his comment. And there's all these people sitting at home like, yep, they're going to pile up in landfills all right. But no, big oil's behind it, man. They've got a lot of money. They're way too disruptive, and there's a lot of dealer associations that have a ton of money. The fight they put up against Tesla in every state they possibly can is huge. They have a lot to lose, man. If your job counted on it, you'd be against it too. That's really what it comes down to. You have to, if your salary and everything you have built is surrounded on this technology failing. They're relying on it too. And so they're going to put as much as they can against it, whether it's shorting the stock or promoting anti-EV media around it. There's a lot of haters out there and a lot of people that need it to fail. But that's why I think, big oil is shifting so much to whether it's opening charging stations or trying to push hydrogen like it has a chance. But it's, big oil's, I would say, is the biggest advocate against it. But it's creating these anti-EV trolls that are, it baffles me how big of advocates they are for big oil and OPEC. And it's like, I don't know. I hope they're shareholders, because like these guys big oil is making record profits on these idiots, and they're out there fighting for them like they care about them. It baffles me.
Yeah, there's a old Christopher Hitchens quote as you can't reason somebody out of a position they didn't reason themselves into.
Yeah, that is good, man. You're absolutely right. And there's times where you have to recognize that too. And it's like, I could present all the facts in the world to this guy, and he's not going to believe me. His opinion is stronger than facts. And I try to recognize that as soon as I can in most conversations. But there's times where I will write a book. I will write 2 paragraphs. And at the very end of it, I'll say something like, if you made it this far, I'll Venmo you $5. And like, most people never read that far. But I've also sent people some money sometimes, or I invite them out for a free boat ride or something. But most people don't want to educate themselves. It's unfortunate. Ignorance is bliss, but at least have an open mind to it. And that's all I ask of people. And, I've got this photo album on my Facebook, and it's like, electric propulsion doesn't suck. That's all I'm trying to prove. Like, I'm not saying it's the best. I'm not saying it's perfect. I just want to convince you it doesn't suck. And there might be a use case for it. And if people will accept that, we will make so much more progress.
Alrighty, well, we have just crested an hour, so I'm going to call that the end of the show. We powered through that, huh?
Yeah, man, it's crazy. There's I don't know. I warned you. I could go down a rabbit hole with some of these topics.
You don't have to tell me, man. I've known you for a long time.
Yeah, it's dangerous. There's times where I get these questions at boat shows, and it's like, how much time you got? You want the 1-minute answer or the 10-minute answer? Because like, you can start taking notes. But we're creating a website to debunk a lot of this stuff. We just launched it. It's pretty rough. E-Boat Bingo. But it's a grid full of 25 myths, and you can go there, play with it. We'll link it in the description. But E-Boat Bingo, if you want to kind of educate yourself out there. And we're going to make it open source, like Wikipedia style. You can make edits. Obviously, not all of it's going to be 100% perfect, but I want to make it as accurate as possible.
Alrighty, well, that's going to be it. You've been listening to the Electrified Marina Podcast, brought to you by Electrified Marina, electrifiedmarina.com. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please share with your friends. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Drop us a like and leave us a question or comment. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.